Hello. So today what we're going to talk about is preparing for your presentation. And so I love this quote, the will to succeed is important, but what's more important is the will to prepare. And this is a quote by former basketball coach at Texas Tech and IU, Bobby Knight. And I think this really speaks to the idea of obviously as you're going into a presentation, you want to, believe that you're going to do well and do everything you can to succeed. But the chances that you're going to be successful are very highly correlated to the amount of time and preparation you put into that. And so this is one of those times where, as you're going into presentation, you don't want to necessarily just wing it. These, especially if it's not an impromptu presentation, you have to do something. So take the time to prepare and give yourself enough time that you can make edits to it. You can practice what you're doing. So 2 hours before a presentation might not be the best time to start preparing, right? And the idea is as you prepare and you gather and you organize your ideas and thoughts and words, you will ultimately be more successful. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about ways of organizing the information. So this is, you might have a topic, you've done research, you sort of have an idea of these are the things that I want to talk about, these are the things that I want to say. And then how do I take that information and gather it together? And then also we're going to specifically talk about introductions and conclusions and sort of best practices and tips for starting and ending your presentation in a powerful way. So organizing your presentation. Now this part is really important. No matter how long your presentation is, you want to have 2 to 3 main points. Why is that? Part of it has to do with how people process information. So if you remember from last week, we talked a lot about the brain and how it processes narratives. Well, in the same way, just information in general, the human brain has the capacity to remember certain amounts or chunks of information. And so 2 or 3 is good in that I can walk away, and even if I don't remember all the details of what you said, I can very easily recall if you had 2 or 3 main points. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a ton of information. You just need to think about how you're organizing it. And does this really need to be its own thing? Or can it fit into a main point? Or maybe it's information that's extraneous that's not really needed. And if you can get yourself narrowed down to those 2 to 3 main points, you can often identify what that information that is extra is and get rid of it. Now, the book walks you through several organizational patterns. And again, there's lots of options. There's spatial, chronological, topical, causal, problem, solution. The reality is, for a given topic, there might be multiple ways that you can organize that information, but there should be a reason to what you're doing. So let's take, for example, if I was going to give a presentation about the flu vaccine. Now, again, this could be an informative presentation, it could be persuasive, multiple things. So, depending on what I want to focus on, I might be like, maybe I want to take a chronological approach. So, I want to talk about, the beginning of vaccines, the history of kind of vaccines and what vaccines are, and then talk about how the flu vaccine was developed or when it came about. Topical, flu vaccines, if I'm talking about how it works, a flu vaccine works due to 2 processes. So the actual formulation and then the reaction in the body, right? Or if there's a problem solution, I can identify there's a problem that each year multiple people become seriously ill and die because of the flu, or people miss school and work because of the flu. Well, what is the solution? The solution is vaccines, right? Or, variety of ways you could go about this. But as you can see in all the examples I was giving, you can pull out what were those 1 or 2 main things. The other benefit of having these 2 to 3 declared main points for you is if you literally type those out or write those on a paper, as you're looking at what supporting information you have, you can just start to pop it in there. And it becomes a lot easier to figure out how to say things and in what order. So let's talk about a little bit about the introduction. This is arguably the most important part of your presentation. People make snap judgments. And so very, very quickly, your audience is going to decide if they think you're good or not, if they think you're worth listening to. Now, you might get better as you go along, but it's very hard to overcome a weak beginning. The other thing is the introduction actually sets your audience up in a way that they can be the most successful listener, because after the introduction, they're going to know sort of who you are, why you're talking about this, what you're talking about, what's in it for them. So there's key parts, and depending on your presentation, some of these might not be relevant, but you're always going to want to start with an attention grabber. So the idea is, please, please, please do not start a presentation, particularly in COM 114, is, hi, my name is Dr. Hall, and today I'm going to talk about introductions, right? Okay, not really that interesting. Now, even if people don't know who you are, start with something like the quote at the beginning, or start with an image, or start with a cartoon. Make reference to a current event that's happening. Then you can go in. Other key parts are a relevant statement. And this is, why is this relevant to your audience? Why should they care about this topic? How does it directly impact them? So with flu vaccines, many people in your audience may have had the flu. Each year they are susceptible to getting the flu. They may have family and loved ones that are high risk, and getting the flu could be very detrimental. Whatever it is, you really need to think about and help them, because people have limited attention spans. They have a limited amount of space that they can keep what you're saying, and we're much more likely to pay attention and care about things that directly impact us. The credibility statement is about you as the speaker, and that is where you tell your audience why they should listen to you. What makes you a credible source of information? Why should I trust you? So if you remember back to the very first video I did, where I did introduce myself, I mentioned that I was Dr. Jennifer Hall. I taught here in the Lamb School at Purdue, and I was the director of COM 114. From those, you could gather that I have the education, the title, the job position that lends me credibility to talk to you about this. Now, for classes, sometimes you might say, I'm not an expert. I don't really know. I just did some research. Get in the habit of using a credibility statement. Sometimes just being passionate and interested. You know, I've spent a lot of time looking into this. I've always cared about this. I've had personal experience. And then probably one of the most essential parts of your introduction is your thesis statement. This should be one sentence, maybe two, but after you say it, I should know exactly what you're going to be talking about and what your main points are. So if I was giving a presentation on flu vaccines, and let's go informative, you want to just talk about what sort of the impact on flu vaccines, the efficacy, like how well do they work? So I could say something to the effect of, flu vaccines have variable efficacy rates each year. In order to understand that, you need to understand how the vaccine is created. And then we'll look at the specific examples of years it has worked better than others. So, you know, I'm talking about the efficacy of vaccines. And my two main points are sort of how it is created, the process of generating the actual injection vaccine. And then the second part, I'm going to talk about examples. So you as the listener are set up to know where I'm headed. So the next thing that's really important are transitions. Just like in writing, when I'm speaking, I want to provide cues to my audience that I'm moving from one topic to another, that I'm moving from one thought to another. The transitions help bring your audience back to what you're saying. So there's several types that the book talks about. The key ones for this class that you always want to make sure is in between main points, from your introduction to your conclusion. Again, let your audience know where you are, where you're going. So a directional transition is where I briefly summarize my first point and then I preview. And again, sometimes people get really caught up in like, how do I say that? And how do I make it sound nice? One of the benefits to giving a presentation versus writing a paper is there's a lot of value in talking just like you talk. So if I was going to switch from, say, introduction to transition, I would say, okay, now that you understand what the 4 parts of the introduction are, let's look at transitions and the purpose they serve, or the types of transitions. Okay. And then other one, signpost, just letting us know, throwing in those keywords. So next, if you have a process, or if you have a list of arguments or reasons, using numbers, or saying, a key factor is this. A really important thing to pay attention to is this. Okay. So use those, and that helps your listener not get lost. And then conclusion, in many ways, is very important as well. Now, this should be the shortest part of your presentation. It should contain no new information, because at that point, you have your introduction, you have your body, you have all of your evidence. The conclusion is where you remind your audience one final time what you said. And this might be the thing that they remember most, because it's the most recent information they heard. And if they sort of zoned out anywhere, this is a good recap. And so the key parts you need to transition to the conclusion. So let me know, because I might just think you're still talking, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's it, which is not a good way to end a presentation. So something as simple as saying, so in conclusion, or to summarize, or to wrap things up, or, to bring things to a close. Then a summary of the main points. It's sort of a restatement of the thesis. So today I talked about how vaccines are developed, and I gave some examples of different years and how effective they were. And then you want to end with what's called a clincher. Think of that as like an attention grabber, but just at the other end of your presentation. That's it. I'm done. The end. Not good clinchers. So this should be a thought, a question, a quote, a call to action, that very last thing they hear. So if I'm talking about vaccines, I might end with a quote from, say, Jonas Salk, who invented the polio vaccine, or a statistic, but we can see, regardless of the year, this many lives they believe have been saved by vaccines, right? And then resist the temptation to say, that's it, I'm done, and just take a pause. Say that with finality, and stand there for a beat or two. And your audience should sense by the way that you're talking and the way you wrapped it up that it is over. So, number one thing for presentation, be prepared. And I have here a map. Use your tools. Create a map for yourself. Use a framework. Use, an outline. But this idea of look at what you have. So for class, if you have a framework template and it asks you to fill in a transition or put in a attention grabber, go ahead and write that. You don't have to write it out word for word, because you don't want to sort of write a paper, but putting down what your ideas are and seeing them written out can help you edit. It can also make it more likely that you're not going to forget things. Another tool of preparation are your note cards. Now, obviously, don't want to read your entire presentation, but you also don't feel like you have to memorize it. If you have a lot of complicated statistics, you want to make sure you remember your sources and where they're from. So use note cards, but use them in a way that helps you, that jogs your memory, that contains key information. And then, as always, practice your presentation. Get used to talking about it so that it feels very, very comfortable to you when you're working on it.